Hi, everyone, and welcome to Hospitality Huddles. Today, we've got a great topic to focus on, and we've got some really good people on the panel. And it comes from something that this year I've seen on the rise more and more and more, and that is where coaching can really be effective in your business. And I've used the example a couple of times about how I was working with a client and he had an individual who wasn't performing, and really good guy. He'd been there quite a while. And he said to me, I know I'm going to lose him because I don't have the time to spend with him properly and coach him. And I said, well, at this point here, you probably need an external coach to come in and save this guy in your business if you want to keep him. And he got a coach. That coach spent time with the person, and that person has now gone from strength to strength in the business to a point where he's now got promoted in the business. And it really showed me about how powerful coaching can be. So I reached out to the people on the panel today. We're going to introduce themselves to talk about why I think coaching should be a big part of people's strategies moving into 2024 as we look to invest in our people and really help develop that skill set that I think a lot of us can really say is lacking in some respects when it comes to soft skills and managing people. So I'm going to ask each of the panelists to introduce themselves, and then we're going to fire into some questions. If you're watching on the live stream, and you'd like to ask the panelists any questions or share a point of view, really welcome to do that. And we'd love to have as many people engaging as possible. So I always give a shout out to the digital hospitality room that's held by Sean Walchef, with some other great people on there, such as Troy Hooper, Jason Berkowitz, Monty, Andy are also on there as well. And at the start of every session, we always have 60 seconds to talk about ourselves and our business, to do the best introduction that we can. So Monty, I'm going to come straight over to you to give you 60 seconds to tell everyone who you are and what you do.
Hi, thanks, Scott. I'm Monte Silva. I spent 25 years in restaurant operational management, which included working for Wolfgang Puck and another restaurant that was the 31st highest grossing restaurant in the country. From there, right around COVID, I shifted and went to coaching. I decided not to do straight consulting, which we'll talk about later in the show, but I'm a restaurant coach. I write a column for FSR magazine. I have a book coming out called Shift Happens, and I live in Tampa with my wife and my son.
Awesome. Thank you very much. Andy, coming to you next.
So I'm Andy Jones, and I'm the host of the Hospitality Leadership Podcast and founder of Cafe Hustle Hospitality. And really what we do, our mission is to simplify leadership and hospitality, and everything we do is geared around that. And that's a blend of coaching, mentoring, workshops, different programs to support businesses to help them grow their people, grow themselves. And yeah, and this topic today is great for us to really talk about how we can grow businesses through the power of coaching. But my background really is very varied through construction, retail, central government, a massive variety of backgrounds before I came into hospitality. Owned a coffee shop for 3 years, but my passion's always been leadership. And now I've combined that with the passion of hospitality to help other hospitality businesses.
That's awesome. Thank you. And it's good to be asking you some questions today for a change as well. And same to you, Adam, turning the tables back onto you. So 60 seconds, really good to have you on.
Yeah, my name is Adam Lamb. I am the host of Chef Life Radio and also co-host of Turning the Table podcast. I have been working on this podcast since about 2014, back in the day when I was dating a Canadian woman living in Canada without a work permit. And I said, well, gosh, what should I do with my time? I said, oh, I know, I'll do a podcast, as if anybody even knew what a podcast was in 2014. But very quickly, I understood that that type of technology could be leveraged to start talking about some of the things I have seen in my 40 years of hospitality experience, primarily as a chef from restaurants, hotels, multi-entertainment companies, senior living facilities. I've seen and done just about everything since, walked into a kitchen when I was 15 years old to wash dishes. And so I support chefs, hospitality professionals, and organizations level up their leadership by talking about basically three different components. One is emotional intelligence. The other one is relationship building. skills and communication skills, because I reflect on my storied career and realize that almost every single thing that went sideways for me was, basically due to those three things. So in some ways I teach what I need to learn, and I come to it as an apprentice. I have some mastery, but I'm really looking to support people in getting their own work done so that they can actually live the lives and have the careers that they've always dreamed of.
That's awesome. And I think we should touch on communication later, because if anything, now communication has got easier, but it's actually probably one of the big things that's lacking in 9/10 of organizations that I see that have issues with leadership and issues in their experience as well. So we'll definitely touch on that. But I guess to set the scene, if there's people listening to this now and they're sitting there going, why is coaching? Why are you talking about coaching? Why is coaching such a big thing? What is you guys are established coaches, you're spending time with people every day. What are some of the pain points that you're seeing in operations that means coaching has to be so effective or can be so effective in operations? I guess, Andy, I'll come to you first on this one, and then we can go around the table after that.
I think the biggest thing that we see more often than not is certainly owners or managers who are carrying massive workloads, huge workloads. And to be honest, more often than not, they're not really warranted to be carrying that workload. I think that really comes down to the fact that we in hospitality, we develop workforces, we develop teams that are heavily dependent on their leaders. And this is something really that coaching can really help you unlock. And that's certainly something we work with our clients on doing, is creating what we call independent organizations, where we've got people throughout the business who know their job, they're trained to do their job, but their mindset is that they know how to do their job. Too often we have people that will, have to check with their manager before they do anything. And all that does is stifle the growth of the business, but also stifles the guest experience when it's not seamless. So that's probably one of the biggest areas that we work on the most. But you also touched on communication, and getting that communication framework in place. Working with people to do that is another area that we have probably the biggest level of progress with people. Certainly over time, once they develop that framework and they start using it, then there's big advantages to be had from that in the workplace. But certainly definitely the biggest area we find is helping people embed coaching into their culture and start to develop people to think independently and for themselves. And you can scale a business exponentially from that point.
Yeah, it's a really good point. Monty, over to you. What are the things that you're seeing out in the market at the minute?
Yeah, I see a lot of the same things that Andy does over in England. I think that we, as an industry, have really we've embraced a 50-year-old model that just doesn't work. And so I think that a lot of the work that I do is mindset. I don't come in. It's kind of like if someone wanted to get in shape, I can write a workout plan and I could write a dietary, menu for them, but they still have to do the work, right? And I think sometimes the lack of ability to do that is what really makes the difference. And so as a coach, I'm more of a personal trainer, where I will put things into place like a diet and a workout plan, and then come alongside them. So when it comes to coaching in a restaurant industry, it's really helping them change their mindset on a 50-year-old model that doesn't work. I was on Adam's show and we talked about this, Turning the Table. Mm-hmm. I think that we have these old ideas that are false beliefs, and I'll use one as an example and then segue into what I see. Labor. What do? We cut labor as tight as we can, and then we expect our salaried people to pick up the slack. And what that does is it doesn't allow them to work on the business. They're too busy, knee deep in it, working in the business. I think, Adam raised his hand. I think we're all probably guilty of that in our career. And we have to change the mindset where it's not just about saving money. It's about productivity and being the most successful you can. And if your salaried people are doing the job, then they're not able to do what they're actually there for, which is leading and leading people and managing systems. So I think that that's a big problem that exists today. The other thing is, I think there's a lot of people that know what to do, but when they get caught up in the weeds, they don't do it. And sometimes having that outside perspective as a coach that can look at it from 2,000 feet, can see and help and guide and remind them that they already know what the right thing to do. It's just a matter of getting to it. And what I'm seeing with their management teams is these managers are getting promoted. Andy mentioned this. They're getting promoted and they know what to do, as they know how to do the job of the people they manage, but they've never been taught how to lead other people to do their job.
Yeah, it's a really good point. And Heather Cox actually has just brought up a great point about changing your mindset is great, but it's taking action on that mindset that's the biggest challenge, isn't it? And that's, Adam, where I guess coaches can come in really useful in that situation where you identify the problem, you look at what the plan is, and then you can help them and guide them and coach them through that action to see it into implementation, can't you?
Absolutely. And I refer back to the title of this particular episode, why coaching should be a part of your people strategy. Yesterday, I had the opportunity to be on a call. I've been asked to serve on the board of Lackawanna College and their culinary or their hospitality programs. And so there was a conversation about curriculums and stuff. And so taking deep dive into the curriculums, I recognized that there were a couple things that were missing. And speaking about my own career and those around me, I've never seen a class called leadership in a culinary school, let alone coaching. And so I think most of the organizations out there would agree that they can really assist in hard skills. And I hesitate to use the soft skill analogy because this is actually a military terminology that came up in the military in the United States when talking about hard skills was with, weapons, and soft skills were about how to lead a team. So I'm continuing to refer to these as either human skills or career skills. And those are often elements that we don't get taught as we're coming up. Now, most of us can probably point to one or two mentors that we had in our careers. If we've had any longevity, it's because there was somebody in our lives that saw our greatness before we could. And if we were lucky enough, we could kind of use them as a model to understand what mentorship really is. And Monte, when you talk about that 50-year-old experiment, I often think back to, to be a culinarian previously, if you wanted to be a chef, you apprenticed to a chef. And very often those were in year increments. And you learned much more than just peeling potatoes, even though sometimes that might be your job for that first year. But it's almost like going back to the old ways, which was, we as hospitality professionals often have a specific experience and skill set that is almost like magic, the male masculine wizard of, holds initiation and rite of passage and secret knowledge. And so if we were lucky enough to have that in our lives, then we kind of know what that looks like a little bit. But I had to actually leave the industry in order to take coaching courses so that I understood what coaching was. Because in start of my career, I thought, leading people was just telling them what to do. And then I understood that wasn't working very well. And so there are all these iterations that come from a certain amount of maturity that I gained, that I realized there were gaps between what I was able to provide and what my fellow associates were actually looking for. And as far as I'm concerned, the success metrics for a chef is how many cooks came through your organization who became chefs in their own right. Not despite you, but because of you. Sometimes it might be a little chip on your shoulders. And so to look at that, I recognize that there's only one way that happens, and that's doing some deep coaching and mentoring. And even though in the culinary industry, I think most chefs are expected to be teachers, right? To be able to school up people in skill sets or educate guests about, particular processes or products that they're using. Yet when it comes down to building, sustaining and deepening relationships, I think that's probably a great metric onto who's successful in the industry, to the degree that they're able to do that. And again, communication skills, relationship building skills. These are things that are not taught in our field, and yet they are absolutely essential to our progress, our success, and our own sense of satisfaction. Because right now, a lot of the people that I talk to are walking around with this deep sense of feeling, I wouldn't say betrayed, but certainly not appreciated by their customers, by their bosses, by their associates. Now, that's one conversation to have about, like, where does one find satisfaction in their life, which very often has nothing to do with their career. But a lot of us came into this industry thinking that, you know, we were going to attain a certain level of notoriety or success or whatever, thinking that that would kind of feed that space in our heart and our soul that, you know, actually needed that, as opposed to, like, how can we be in service to others so that they can, you know, walk away from that exchange nourished and satisfied.
Yeah, it's a really good
Scott,
point.
can I add something that?
Yes, totally.
So Adam said something brilliant, and I love the fact that, you know, we have a chef here, because that brings a different perspective, and that staging idea that you have. You know, I'm reminded of growing up in the kitchen and staging in kitchens, and while they weren't always the best scenarios, you know, getting pans thrown at you, it was a true discipleship kind of relationship where you know, you were being mentored by someone, and you would work for free, you know, just to get that experience. And I think the listeners really need to think about what you just said, Adam, about that whole staging that used to take place and how that's vacant now because we have to pay people when they come into our kitchen or our restaurant.
Right. And I think, you know, there was did a presentation out in Tucson where I talked about the perfect storm in the culinary industry, which happened during the 80s, which was, you know, the advent of for-profit culinary schools, the Food Network, and Kitchen Confidential. And those three things came together to create this mystique, this mystery of what it was like to be in the industry, kind of pulling the curtain back. And for a lot of folks coming into the industry, that was kind of their guiding light of what they wanted to be. And I've actually discovered that, you know, there's more than one way up the mountain. And for a culinarian, there's lots of different markets that they can be in where they can actually have a fulfilling career and also a vibrant home life, you know, away from that. So coaching in of itself provides an opportunity for providing an outside perspective from where somebody might be at, to co-create some action plans and to hold that person accountable. It's that simple. And it goes without saying that most of our industry is built around this idea of instant gratification. I know for me, the feeling of putting up a plate in the window, bang, feels your heart, and you're like, great. Or instant feedback from the guest coming back, oh my God, Jeff, that was the greatest thing. But after a while, that starts to wear thin. It's so what people would say, hey, thanks, that's really great. You're like, yeah, whatever. But to understand that our growth is not in the instant gratification, but in the ability to delay gratification, such that we're going through this discovery process with a coach, and to understand that, you know, not only are we going to be different at the end, but the coach is also going to be different, because one thing that I don't think we say a lot is that it's a symbiotic relationship. I also get served in this because I'm also getting a different perspective than what I'm actually coming from. And so for me, it's an incredibly gratifying position to be in, and to see somebody just start running after that, it's fantastic. Because and I think all of us can agree, you know, we come from this as like, you're not broken and you don't need fixing, but sometimes a different perspective can help. So to be able to see the penny drop in their eyes and then all of a sudden take it from there, like once I'm your coach, I'm always your coach. But I get that, you know, I want to be able to have you connected so well to your inner guidance that you don't really need to call me at all, because you know what's best for you.
Yep. We've just had two really good comments, actually, that is very similar to where we're at on some of this conversation. And the first one was by Karen Moody, who we both know, Adam, as well. And many hospitality courses are focused on guest-centric modules, and the business operation overall. The people and leadership models are sadly lacking. And then we've had another one from Trevor Walford, who says about coaching and training go together. The problem is too many management do not have the experience in the field. And it's really interesting. I was on a conversation with Chris Hall from the Burnt Chef earlier in the week, and we were talking about a project that we're working on, and we were looking at some data, some scientific data that the Burnt Chef had done with a restaurant group here in the UK. And the big thing that came out of it was that the people most likely to burn out in the hospitality industry right now is middle level management. So general managers, F&B managers, restaurant managers, etc. And as we were on the course, it was on the call, I was kind of sitting there thinking, do you know what, actually, if I think about all the businesses I work with, a lot of their initiatives, a lot of the people initiatives are focused on the mass, which is the team level, the team member level, and probably because they want to spend X amount of cash, they want to see an ROI, and the best way to do that is to affect the masses. My argument to that would be, based on seeing this scientific data, that our leaders are the most likely to be burnt out because of everything that you guys have said: overwhelm, process, too much paperwork, too much admin, too high expectations on budgets, etc. Is it doesn't matter how much money you throw at the junior level, if the leadership isn't right, you're wasting your money because it's never going to be carried through. And I guess, Andy, based on those comments that we've just seen from a couple of people in the audience and my example there, I guess that's really where the point of this topic, which is how we can have external coaches helping your people, can really help develop that leadership style, which means if you are spending cash, it's got a clear ROI because it's being delivered properly in the business, right?
And certainly from our perspective, our value is not in just what we bring at the moment. Every session that we have with people, it's about creating a culture. And Scott, I talk a lot about creating cultures in business that help to feed the people, but also the guest experience. And they go hand in hand. But what always baffles me in such a people-centric industry, everything that we do, every guest experience largely depends on the interaction between our people and the guest. And we invest very little in that. And, turning back to Karen and Trevor's comments, we historically do focus on the operational side, the processes, making sure everything is right there. What we don't focus on is adaptability and the ability for our people to be dynamic, or to, embrace that dynamic situation that hospitality presents us. We have guests that come in that bring, no two guests are the same, are they? They come in, they've both got different needs or expectations, and our job is to meet that. And if we don't, and if our people are too rigidly focused on their training as delivered, we're not going to get that true, that exceptional, memorable guest experience. And that is where coaching can really help us, even, talking there about investing at, the lower levels, the customer facing levels of our business. And I think there is massive value in coaching those people, but we have to ingrain it in the culture of the organization. It's no good using external providers for coaching for every person in your business. It's about how can we develop senior management in the mindset, coming back to what Monty said, in that mindset of people development and coaching, so that can then cascade down through your organization and it becomes part of that culture. So everyone is looking to develop and coach people below them. That's where we start to unlock exceptional, memorable guest experiences.
Couldn't agree more.
And Monty, I guess if it, when I take what Andy's just said there and I think about situations, you look at how people are being processed through the ladder at the minute. So if we talk about maybe when I was coming up through the ranks, and I'm sure it was the same for you, you did a certain amount of time in each role. Generally, if you left a job before 2 years, it was deemed bad, and you sat there and you learned each level, you moved up, and you made mistakes, you learned from great people above you. And because we're now fast tracking people through the system, is there an element of where that experience building, that mistake learning is being lost, and therefore a coach adds that ability to help people learn on the job a bit easier, because they're not having to go to a boss and admit they've made a failing, or they don't know what they're doing, or because a lot of certainly when I see leaders now in this situation, they seem to lack confidence. They know they're probably above where they need to be, but the salary's great, the position's brilliant, they want to progress, so they're almost scared to help. Is that a situation where coaches can help them with that situation as well?
Yeah, I think, to Adam's point, I think that the days where, and to your point, I worked 20 years in hourly positions before I got into management. And a big reason why I waited was because I saw how managers were treated. They were making less than we were as servers and bartenders, and they were working way harder. And so I think that we have to understand that the old ways of like people paying their dues and coming up through the ranks. I started off at 15 as a dishwasher, just like Adam did, and worked my way through the kitchen and then moved to the front, and then went back to the kitchen, was a kitchen manager and a chef, and then back to the front again. Because we don't have those opportunities where people today want to go through that process, they either stay on the hourly side because it's quick, easy money while they're pursuing something else. And they rarely really want to go, hey, I think I'd like to be a manager, right? And so I think we've lost a lot of that training and development because of that. And I think we're getting a lot of people jumping into restaurant management that haven't done the hourly thing. And so your program, when you're training someone, really has to invest in some of those hourly hard skills. I worked for Chevy's Mexican restaurant. It was my first management job. And they had a system where not only did you go through training for 6 weeks as a manager in training, but then because it wasn't a super high level culinary, sexy food kind of a thing, it was, casual Mexican style restaurant, Tex-Mex. You might be the assistant, you might be the bar manager for 6 months, and then the assistant KM, and then the service manager. And you had to do all three of those roles before you were a head KM, and you had to do that before you were a GM. So I elevated through that in 2 years and went from bar manager to assistant KM to service manager to KM, and then followed my mentor to another company and was instantly made a GM. So in 2 years, I went through a pretty intense training process that really got me ready to be a GM so I can have intelligent conversations with everybody that worked, I always say worked with me, but, technically they're both, they're sub managers for me. And it really, really helped my career. And 2 years after that, I was a GM for Wolfgang Puck. And had I not had that culinary background, I would have never been able to achieve that, with him. So I think that because that lack of working through the ranks exists today, I think that we have to be very cognizant of that and focus as much on the hard skills as the soft skills. If we've got someone that's already got the hard skills because they came up, let's focus on the soft skills, And I think that if we look at our employees, that's another false belief we've had for 50 years. We looked at them as a liability on a P&L because they subtracted from our income. And so what we did was, as a liability, you want to try to minimize that. So you pay them less than what you should. You schedule them less than you should. You throw all that extra work on a salaried manager, and it just doesn't work. It's not going to attract people to move up through the ranks, and it's not going to attract people from the outside. But when we look at them as an asset on the balance sheet, then we want to grow that asset. We want it to mature, right? You buy a stock, you want it to gain more value, and the only way for us to do that with employees is to develop them and offer the training and support and respect, and schedule them the amount of time to be most productive. And it's very counter culture to the last 50 years.
Yeah, Scott, sure. Can I just jump in on, I know you said before, you're talking about, the confidence of you. And we are, as an industry, in this situation right now where we are promoting people essentially beyond their abilities, and we are stretching them. And I think not to be promoting, as we provide coaching services, not to overly promote that, but this is where I think coaching really does pay off with these people who are coming up. They may not have the experience behind them, but they've been a bit good at their job. They've got an element of showing their potential, but they're being pushed. And I think there's a big misconception with coaching that comes into this. And when you're working with coaches, it's not always a case of that coach coming in and telling you how to do everything and guiding you almost like a mentor would. What we do is allow people to explore their own thoughts and their own knowledge and, challenge their decision making and their critical thinking so that they are in a better position to deal with a lot of the challenges that, that face them in hospitality. But certainly for people who are stretched, who are promoted beyond, or say beyond their ability, it's a bit harsh, I think. But, when we are stretching people, what doesn't happen at the minute in the industry is we don't have the support to back those people up. We can promote them, they can lead from a position of being inexperienced, but we must be giving them the support, whether it's from senior managers or from external people like ourselves that can coach them and support them through their challenges. That's what we need to help develop people sustainably. And, it's giving them that support so that they can take that stepping stone and they can, explore their thoughts and what they're experiencing firsthand on the floor with the help of what I call guided perspective. It's what we provide.
And yeah, it's a really good point, isn't it? And I guess within that, and Adam, I'll fire this one at you, because working with chefs obviously is a very different beast to working with front of house people sometimes.
Why would you say that?
What?
Let's keep it clean. So how well do you need to know the organization that they're working? Or do you prefer not to understand the organization they're working in so that you remain totally objective? And then I guess if I'm looking at this from a business owner or a manager, you want to know what you're getting out of it.
Sure.
More than just the physical, like you can see that he's improving, you can see his leadership styles getting better. So how do you work with the owner, the operator, the hotelier, etc., for what they're seeing, as much as it is, I guess, the person you're coaching? Because I guess that's going to be something that anyone watching this is going to go, okay, like, what do I get out of it?
So before I answer that, I just wanted to kind of tag on with what Monty and Andy were talking about. I think it probably serves this conversation to make sure, as Trevor and Karen have put in their comments, there is a difference between training and coaching and leading and managing, and our industry needs all of those. But when you're dropping one out, like Karen made a comment about, some companies say, oh, well, coaching's too expensive for us, then we'll just go ahead and do another training. And HR is able to tick their box and stuff like that. And while I understand that, I also get from my own experience, like I certainly would not be here if I hadn't hired coaches. And you talk to anybody who's successful, or not even wildly successful, somewhat successful, they're part of a mastermind group. They're part of, they have either a professional or business coach. Buddy of mine was talking to me about this 70-year-old guy who's like got 4 coaches. He's got one for pickleball. He's got one for, like, he wants to be better. And I think all of us can agree that there's probably not a single person in this industry that, doesn't want to do a bad job, wants to go home feeling good about the job that they've done and want to become better. Nobody's that complacent where they're like, oh, this is enough. Although I understand why someone can get that way, especially if they don't see the opportunity. So I just want to reflect on the retirement community I was working for. They had one, as part of their HR package, they had this associate aid package where they contracted with a local counselor. And if someone was having some difficulty in their life and needed to speak to somebody, it was completely anonymous. HR only saw that they got a bill, that there was an appointment with no name on it, no nothing. So they saw the value, the organization saw a value in being able to offer this as a benefit to their staff. I would also argue that coaching also serves that same purpose. And once organizations understand that we're playing the long game here, and that ROI is not necessarily going to come in a quarter, but all you have to do is look at your retention rates for staff. And that will tell you right then and there whether or not your culture is working, whether or not you have the correct support systems in place. As Annie was talking about, this idea of there was a book that was written in the early 60s called The Peter Principle, which is exactly about this theory that at some point everybody will be promoted to the area of their incompetence, not because they're incompetent, but because, just because I'm a great server doesn't necessarily mean that I'll be a great lead server. So it's just that I've seen someone place a comment. I became a certified coach for my team, best expense ever, of course. But not a whole lot of people understand that coaching is, again, another skill set in our tool belt when we are growing teams. So when someone approaches me, I had someone talk to me about some group coaching for his culinary leadership of a mid-scale, not mid-scale, but a mid-sized boutique hotel company. And I was just curious. I'm like, so why do you think this would serve them? He's like, well, Adam, everybody needs to hear that it's okay to not be okay, right? My guys need to get this. And sure, you could say chefs are a little bit of breed apart. What I've come to understand, especially in doing my own work, is that, yeah, we're pretty stubborn. We think that there's no gap. We think that that what separates us from where we are to where we want to be, and I think there's a lot of people in the hospitality industry that feel this way, is all I have to do is pedal faster. If I could just work harder, if I could just figure out, I'm taking paperwork home? Am I like doing stuff on my day off in order to be seen as like the guy or the girl or the woman, I should say. And all those are like straw men, because I don't care how fast you pedal, you'll never be able to get ahead of the curve. And really those gaps that are the gap that exists between where you are and where you want to be exists within the realm of those, very often those three things: emotional intelligence, relationship building, and communication skills. Once you got those three clocked, then Bob's your uncle. You can go anywhere you want. And not only that, you start to realize that you can coach wherever you're at, because every moment is a coaching moment. Every moment that you're interacting with another person is an opportunity to coach. And I would say to those that would try, always ask permission first, because it's always about consensus. We never want to just blab on because we think somebody needs, because I've tried that too and got, you can only lead a horse to water so many times without getting kicked in the chest. So I found it a much better tactic to say, well, this is what's available, and are you interested in that? And okay, cool, let's have a conversation about that. I find it helps me to kind of break through some of the the chef community is very, very tight, and sometimes very hard to jump that fence if you're not a chef. And I'm not talking about just being able to talk as a chef. Even chefs who might have gone on to say now they're a physical health coach for chefs. Even some of them get ragged on by their friends. Oh, you're not a chef anymore, man. You're just trying, you're just trying to make money off us. Like we got to lose weight. We got to do that. I was thinking about a post that I was going to do this week, which is like, if a chef can eat almost anything that he wants, why is it that we eat the worst out of it? Like, why am I standing above the garbage can, shoveling food in my face just in order to, get to the next thing? So, before we got on the call, we were talking about this kind of time of fall and winter and what we're all doing. And now the new year is turning over. For me, this is a really critical time for self-reflection, to celebrate my wins, to take a look at the goals that I set in January of last year. How close did I come? And not that I failed, like, where's the gap? What didn't I do? I had to go through a really significant back surgery in April. And right before that, I had a whole rash of possible clients. And I said, hey, I got to do this thing and take care of myself first. And, lost a few of those leads. But I had to actually slow down so far that I was doing really nothing. And yet, for some reason, the calls kept coming and the inquiries were coming in because the messaging was landing, which is like, if you're not where you need to be, let's have a conversation. If your organization is a little ragged around the edges, let's talk about that. Because again, this whole idea of time. So our industry is, we can become so siloed and so focused on we're here to do food and beverage that we forget about things like Zoom calls. I don't think, a chef ever had a Zoom call prior to COVID or online webinars, or which have been part and parcel of almost every other industry for many years now. So in some ways, we're just catching up to the possibility that exists, not only for these type of technologies, but for also how coaching and mentoring can actually add such a profound effect. And, Monte, when you were on the show, the first thing we talked about was everybody's crying that they didn't have enough staff. And where you were in Tampa, you were going around to these very busy restaurants and finding that they were fully staffed. and I can probably guarantee that, those were the ones that had the best leadership and not necessarily the best managers. Would you agree?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I think that, to your point, talking about the differences between leaders and managers, as managers, it's our job to manage systems, right? And payroll and, and that puts us in a place where we're looking at the P&L. And leaders are, leaders lead people. They don't manage them. If you're managing, that's called babysitting, right?
Yep.
And so I think we've all been guilty of that because we're like, well, it's easier if I just do it, right? And then we get in this circular pattern where we're just going down, down, down. We get our head down and all we're focused is what's directly in front of us. And we don't have that elevated perspective where we can see the forest through the trees. And then we just keep that cycle going. It just keeps going around, around. It gets worse and worse because we keep digging in more and more and more instead of going, you know what, if I invest, I can't remember if it was Andy or Adam that said this, but if I can't invest in the long picture beyond this quarter, this month, this week, and whenever I was leading a team in a restaurant and my bosses would come to me and go, man, your labor's a little bit high. Yeah, well, we had a staff meeting that had the entire team together for 2 hours. I hired 6 people because of the growth that we have and had to properly train them. And our review scores have gone up by 2 points because we're providing a better service. And that's also giving our staff time to sell, which then increases our PPA. And so we have to be able to look at those kinds of things. And I've been fortunate enough to get my bosses on the operational level, corporate level, to be thinking about the big picture more and growth. But I think that sometimes you have these leaders in the corporate level or owners that are so fear focused that they are only focused about today. And then the manager and leader focuses on, how do I keep my job today? Well, you do that by cutting labor, right? And fixing your food cost, and then your product isn't as good. And so there's this fine line of managing that's super important. We've got to make money, but we also have to build the business. And then there's the leadership side that is very people focused. And I think that we tend to lump those together and think they're the same thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Monte, the other thing that I was reminded of as I'm listening to you is this idea of, either, like, to a certain extent, we've lost our way in the industry. It used to be about hospitality. And then all of a sudden it started switching to, focusing more on the P&L. Not to say that those weren't ever equally important, but, a hospitality mindset would probably lead you quicker to engaging with a coach or a coach program than it would be if you were managing a P&L. And I've heard lots of folks, including Jensen Cummings, talking about, well, we have to flip the entire P&L. If you're going to manage, you've got 2 choices. You can either manage the top line or the bottom line. And no one ever gets to success by managing the bottom line. And yet very often we're caught in that Chinese finger trap, especially when we have to report to somebody else and they have to report to somebody else, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So to be able to make that case of, like, it's going to cost you between $4,000 to $10,000 to replace a sous chef and train them properly. And then there's the time that's missed out on that. And so how do you squeeze training in when there's no training hours that are allotted? Right? Well, you're supposed to do that during regular service? I mean, how is that possible? So for some extent, it's like, again, kind of caught in this Chinese finger trap about, we know what we need to do, but we're not able to actually do that. And so for me, I think that's the essential conundrum and why I'm so excited about where the industry is headed, because I think more and more sharp operators are going to start understanding what a benefit this possibly be for not only their staff, but also for their customers and their bottom line.
Yeah, Scott talks about this all the time when he's coaching hotel clients, because we've been on several calls together. He's like, why the hell are you sitting in your office, right? And that's a profound thing to ask when you're coaching someone. It's like, why are you in the office? And if they're in the office instead of on the floor, they're focused on management, not leadership, right? And so, to your point, yes, we have to be on the floor to focus on hospitality, but we have to be on the floor to lead. The coach on the side of a football field is constantly, when the defense comes off, they're going over what just happened, and they're doing on-site coaching. They're not sitting at their home watching it on TV, right? And I think it's important to understand that dynamic, that you got to be on the floor if you're going to lead people. You got to be on the floor if you're going to build the sales side of it. And if you're in the office, you're managing the bottom line. That's all you're doing.
Yeah, and even in professional American football now, you're starting to see this trend among some teams where typically their defense or their offensive coordinator is sitting up in the booth, so then they get a better view of now they've got these guys down on the field again with the players, actually interacting with them so that they know what the hell's going on, exactly to your point, Monty.
It's I always go by the saying of profit needs diligence, revenue needs attention. That's what I always say to people, because if you're managing your cost lines appropriately, the only thing you should have to focus on is revenue. And it's interesting because I'm going to put a comment up. So Clive was one of my very first F&B managers. I haven't spoken to him for years, so it's amazing that he's put a comment on here. But he was in the industry, left the industry, and he says he goes back obviously to eating places, etc. And as an outside person, he can see that it's about process and profit. So your customers aren't missing the point of the fact that you're cutting corners as well, and you're focusing on profit. And I think that's a really key one on this, is that you're not fooling anyone if you're focusing on that bottom line. You're not focusing on people, you're not focusing on how you push it. And then back to your sports analogy, we're into football, soccer here, right? Not into American football, so I'll go with that one. But the coach, the head coach, they used to be called managers, they're now called head coaches, right? It's something that's developed over the time. And because they don't get involved in all the other aspects, back to what Monty was saying, now the managers don't get involved in negotiations with new players. That's done by a sporting director. They don't get involved in what's happening with the youth team. That's down to the academy director. They focus on the first team. They create a plan. They spend all week going through that plan, and they practice drills, they practice the formation, they practice what's going to happen at the weekend, they analyze the opposition, they send those players out on the field, and that's it. That's all they can do now, is hope that they go out and they do what they've trained all week to do. That's no different for your waiters. You train them, you do pre-shift meetings with them, you talk about what guests are coming in, and then you let them go and do their thing. And you support them, and you stand on the sidelines, and you're talking to them, you're guiding them, you're coaching them. And I guess, Andy, that's very much about how we're missing those things on the operation now, isn't it? And it's how we have to try and get those principles into some of our junior leaders so that they can manage people more effectively.
It's about giving people, you hear it all the time, setting people up for success, and what you're talking about there is doing just that. You give them that training, you give them that guidance, that support, pre-shift, what we're expecting to happen. But this is where I think we miss out. We miss out on that people development, developing individuals who then can go out there and can create that pizzazz, as Clive was talking about. That's what we're missing. When we're in this age of huge chains that have these brand guidelines and how you should greet customers in a very specific way, we lose that connection because of that. Yes, it's great that, from a consistency standpoint, but people don't always want that. From a guest perspective, they want someone who's there, who's going to connect with them, who's going to interact with what they're saying in that moment. And we get to that point by developing people. And that's, ultimately what coaching does for businesses. It's developing people on an individual level so that they can contribute, towards the vision, the mission, the purpose of the overall organization. And, your sports analogy is perfect for that. Is we're preparing people to go out there to hit the shift when it starts, but then we're relying on those people to make decisions and to interact and meet the needs of the guests as they're presented with them. And if we don't allow people to do that, if we don't set them up in that mindset to do that, then it's going to be a very rigid, very vanilla, not to, dismiss vanilla as a flavor, but, it's going to be a very one-dimensional experience for people. Whereas if we can allow our people, our wait staff, our servers, to bring their personality and to react to what the customers what the customer's asking for, that's where we're going to get really great performances from individual locations, overall organizations, by creating those moments that are special, by empowering our people to do what needs to be done in the moment. We only get that by developing individual people.
Yeah, it's so true. Chick-fil-A call it freedom in a framework. They give you the framework, and you have the freedom to act within it. Right? It's exactly the same. And Adam, I guess back onto the chef's point with you. We all know chefs can be proud. We know that sometimes they can, be the first people to say, "Get out of my office," in the politest way. But you're obviously seeing chefs starting to kind of come to you and ask for help and ask for guidance. So if the chefs watching this, or for people who might be sitting in organizations where they think the chef could benefit, what are some of the things that you're seeing they need the help with the most, or coming to you for help with, and kind of what the successes you're seeing from that?
Well, we kind of walk through our framework, and the first thing really is to reconnect them to their core values. And I know that sounds like a very broad thing, but it's really a very, very specific piece of the foundational work moving forward. Because once they're kind of reconnected to why they got in the industry, what's important about the industry, what do they value, they can also start looking at their organizations and say, do our core values align? And very often what I'm finding is, one of my clients was working at a hotel for about 9 years, and she was unceremoniously dismissed after the company went through a ownership change. And they did it in a really kind of creepy way. There was some allegation that never was brought to the light. Anyway, they just wanted to move the old people out so they could get their new people in. Could understand that, any operator. Yet she went to another job and couldn't understand why she was so sad, depressed. And as it turned out, through our kind of investigation and discovery process, we understood that she had never taken time to grieve this. I mean, she'd been at this one place for 9 years, and then, not to put lipstick on a pig, they shit on her. And yet she's into her new job and still can't understand why she can't reconnect with anybody. So again, this portion about emotional intelligence, I harp about so much because I've seen the power of it in my own life, my own ability to be self-aware, to take stock of my emotions, to do the work, whatever I need. So we created a little ritual where she could actually spend some time mourning this. And pretty quickly thereafter, got a great job at a medical facility, one of the best in her area. And she, it's taken her a while to get used to it, because, you go from the street where everything is dependent on that one dish. Oh my God, if that one dish goes out and it's bad, it's not only that person, but it's the 10 people they tell. And before we know it, the place is closed by the end of the week, that kind of mania, to a more structured organization, and maybe in the healthcare field, or maybe in senior living space, where you've got 700 people who are invested in your success and want you to try things and fail, because they understand that you're trying new things. So very often it's this idea of like, what are your core values, and how are you actually making those live in your life, and do you see that they're mirrored in the organization that you have? And not every one of my clients have gone on to change positions. Some have been completely reinvigorated by what they've discovered and realized, hey, this is pretty good space for me. Because again, this idea of just pedaling faster is not going to get us where we need to be. I've found that in my own career, and a lot of the people that I work with find the same thing. And that comes as a shock, because most of us are kind of hard-nosed and hardworking, and we love the grind. I have a different perspective on the whole grind concept, and I think it's one of the reasons why we have so much burnout. And we do it to one another. We do it to each other. We're razzing each other, giving each other crap if they're not, putting in the hours and things like that. And that internal change is going to be a little bit slower to come, but I'll just keep banging that drum until it happens, because our industry cannot survive, another 50 years of this, because, robots are coming, and, they're showing up everywhere. And while they'll never take place of a human being, they may be an adjunct somewhere. I mean, how do you incorporate the avocado machine into all the, what's the Mexican brand?
Chipotle?
Yeah, Chipotle. They're looking at augmentation to support the mission, while being very cleared out about the fact that we may not be able to hire a prep person at X amount of dollars anymore because there's just none available. So I think there's some just self-assessment and self-awareness that we need moving forward as an industry, and individually as chefs. At some point they're all going to get to the place where I was, which was, fed up, burnt out, my body busted up, and trying to figure out, is this really what it's all about? Because at one point I thought that I had sacrificed everything and that the industry had used my passion against me, right? As a way to kind of lure me into the grind. And the fact is that all the choices I made in my career, I made my own free will. And so to be able to be open-eyed about that and clear about, like, if your present organization doesn't share your core values, then you need to make a change, because they're not going to. And the quicker you get out of that, probably the happier you'll be. Because, I don't know if many people experience this, but happy chefs, seen any around lately? And they're out there. As a matter of fact, I had someone who wanted to do a similar thing as me, as coaching chefs. And he's like, I didn't even know this was a thing, chefs coaching other things. I said, well, it hasn't been, but it will be, because we're all going to get to the point where, like, and Monty, I think you said it, this idea of fear-based management, I think that probably prevents some organizations from accepting some outside help as well, either as a consultant or as a mentor or a coach. They're afraid of being shown up for not knowing. I don't know about you, but as a chef, if I admitted that I didn't know anything, that was my job right then and there. So to be able to have the courage to stand up and say, I could use some support in this area to my HR department. I don't know how to coach people. Can you, like, how do I do that? And if they don't have the answer, somebody in this group is going to have that answer. And God bless us all, because, like I said, another 50 years and we wouldn't have an industry.
Yeah. And Monty, just on kind of following on from Adam there, how do you measure success with clients that you're working with when you're working through processes with them? And I guess, what does that impact look like from there?
Well, I don't have like a set, this is my package. I do 90-day coaching. And, when I was making six figures running restaurants, this is a chance to get an expert in the field at a fraction of the price, to not come on full time, but be able to be an ear, a confidant, someone that is either, it's easy for us if we put our head down and we go, and we go, and we go, and we go. We might just be off slightly, 0.1% on our food cost or whatever. But if we don't autocorrect as the year goes on, it's going to get worse and worse and worse. And I'll use the example of, if you don't stay up on what you're paying for your product,